This is a cooperative narrative adventure described as a hybrid between a board game and an RPG, because this one's going to be featuring multiple adventures, each taking around 10 to 15 hours to complete, but they're going to be divided into smaller chapters that you're going to be able to play over multiple sessions. The game does offer pre-made characters if you just want to jump straight in, but if you want to have more of that RPG experience, there is also a handbook that guides you through creating your own character, which is going to be made up of a different race, origin, and profession, and you're going to have different values for different starting stats, including your movement. And you're also going to have different starting items and gear and character-specific combat cards. And each of these cards are going to have different icons indicating the type of card that they are, and you're only going to be able to have a limited number of each type, which means that you will have to choose between some cards or another. Depending on what it does, it could also have a range or an area of effect, but all these different cards and gear and items that you can assign to your character, and even your character itself, could have different keywords associated with them that can have different effects as you play throughout the game. You're going to be gaining new gear and items that you can equip to your character, but then you're also going to be gaining experience points for making different accomplishments that you can then spend to upgrade your character further. You're eventually going to reach a point where you've fully maxed out your character, and once you get there, this actually gives you the option to take them on one of the many epic deadly scenarios. This is optional to do, so if you feel like your character's had enough and you want to roleplay them a little bit differently, you can also just choose to retire them and then start a new character. But as I mentioned, in order to play this game, you're going to be choosing one of the adventures, and then that's going to be walking you through the overarching story. You can either choose to read this yourself or use the accompanied app, which will also have professional narration. The game does give you an option to just jump in without even reading the rulebook, because there is a tutorial act that's going to be teaching you the game as you play through that act. Of course, each of these adventures are going to have multiple branching paths depending on your successes, failures, and decisions. Some of these decisions might be made as a team, while others might be made by individual players, sometimes even deciding which player makes the decision by the roll of a die. As I mentioned, each of your characters can have different keywords, and depending on which player is interacting with which aspect of the story might indicate that you have to go down a different path depending on the keywords that you currently have in play. As you explore and interact with the different aspects of the world, you're going to have to make different skill checks depending on the different things that you try to do, or maybe even just based on the different situations that you find yourself in. Some of these can be more risky than others, but you're essentially going to be combining your appropriate stats with a dice roll and trying to roll above a certain amount in order to get a success. In some cases, other players can also support you if they do match certain keywords, and in some cases there might be a lot of freedom as to what you can do, whereas in other cases you might have limited options. For example, if there are enemies that have appeared out on the board, forcing the players to make decisions as to whether they want to try and flee or maybe just go head on in battle. These cases often take place on different maps where players are going to be alternating between their turn and the enemy's turn, with the enemies physically moving around to different locations on that map. There might be some special rules to how the enemy moves and behaves, and if you are forced to engage in battle with them, then that often takes place on a separate board where you're going to be taking turns based on tokens drawn from a bag. You're going to be preloading that bag with black and white tokens according to that specific battle, and then drawing those with the white tokens allowing you to activate any of your team's characters, and then the black tokens forcing you to activate one of the enemy's characters. In the case where a player's character is activated, you're normally allowed to take up to 2 actions, and these may or may not require skill checks depending on the action that you're performing, but there's a bunch of different basic actions like moving around on the board or healing, and positioning yourself is really important because there could be different obstacles that you can hide behind that can protect you from some potential attacks. There could also be some special actions that you can choose from that are only specific to that particular battle. Then there are also your character actions to choose from, where you're going to be activating one of your character cards on the right hand side of your board here, and anytime that you do that, you're going to be flipping that card to its opposite side, which usually blocks it out until you meet the requirements to flip it back over. These cards can help you in all sorts of different ways in battle, but they can often be augmented by the different items and gear that you might have in your possession. In the case where an enemy character is activated, you're just going to be following the instructions on their activation card, and if they do end up attacking one of the players, if that player does have a reaction card, they can choose to enact that card in order to try and mitigate whatever the enemy was trying to do to them. Battles continue like this, with drawing those tokens and activating either the player's characters or the enemy characters, and if a player's character's health ever goes down to 0, that's going to gain them a injury token, and if you ever do gain 3 of those, then that is not good news, because that means that you are going to die. There are some ways to get out of this, but more than likely you're going to have to create a new character which can enter the game in your next rest phase. There is some good news for the players as well, because this game does also include something called fate tokens, and you're going to be gaining those usually whenever something bad happens. This is going to allow you to do things like roll dice or manipulate the game in different ways at different opportune moments to try and shift the tides in your favor. This is also a really nice mechanism if you happen to be one of those players that's particularly adept at rolling critical fails, because anytime that you do that in this game, well, that's not going to go well for you, but you do also gain one of these tokens to help you in the future. But the game continues like this until you've either completed the adventure or all the players have died before reaching a rest phase, and that is supposed to be a rare occurrence, but if it does happen and you choose to follow the rules, then that would be ending the game and you would have to start over. If this one sounds interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked down below. And